Good evening. I'm Beth Needle. I'm the Executive Director of the Lafayette Library and Learning Center Foundation. And on behalf of our foundation and the Simpson Family Literary Project Committee, I welcome you to this evening's reception honoring author Anthony Marra, recipient of the 2018 Simpson Family Literary Prize. Tonight, as we gather to celebrate great authors, burgeoning writers, beautiful ballet, outstanding education, let's take a beat to reflect on the profound collaborative impact that two great institutions, led by one great man, can have. So a special thanks to that one man, Joe DePrisco, a unique... Oh, that's an oopa moment. A uniquely determined, creative, some say eccentric genius, whose vision and relentless work inspired the Simpson Family Literary Project. Joe?
Wow. I'm very touched. That was the nicest thing you've ever said to me. So is this live? Yes. Oh, this mic works. Hi, everybody. Very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you, Beth. Those are very sweet words. So thanks for being here to celebrate the Simpson Family Literary Project. Yes, it's Russia theme night. Is it working? Vicky, you look disgusted with me. I see that. Aaron got this in Moscow. Aaron, where are you? Aaron, okay, you swear you got it in Moscow, right? Okay, good. Okay, anyway, it's Russia-themed night for Simpsonsky Projectanovich. That's why we're here tonight. Anyway, right now it's 3 a.m. in Moscow. It's balmy in Moscow, but we're happy you're colluding with us here in Lafayette. We were going to have a Putin ice sculpture, but supposedly saner heads prevailed. And instead we have that wonderful ice sculpture with the Simpson Family Literary Project logo. Anyway, hope you're enjoying the Russian fare created by the brilliant Peter Chastain of Primo Ristorante in Walnut Creek. It was gorgeous. It's fantastic. Wonderful job, Peter. And one of these days you're going to make it in the restaurant business, I'm sure. Anyway, and he's personally donated the caviar. Wasn't that what a wonderful thing? All right. Some words of appreciation for the fabulous people here at the Lafayette Library and Learning Center, our hosts in this beautiful community hall. Huge thanks to Beth and Sarah and Vicky and Sarvi and Brian and Kathy, along with our invaluable volunteers. If there are more competent, good-hearted people in the world, I never met them. So thanks to them. Thanks to the people at the Library Foundation. So about tonight, I'm going to speak for 90 minutes. Okay, 9 minutes, I promise. Then Anthony. Then there will be a Swan Lake pas de deux. It will become clear how that works. Performed by the wondrous Diablo Ballet Company, and not, as you may have feared, by Tony and me. Okay. Okay, although we could do it. And then Tony and I will gather on stage. We'll take some questions, comments, and we'll have fun. The Simpson Project is the unique collaboration of the Lafayette Library and Learning Center Foundation and the University of California, Berkeley English Department. Two fantastic organizations, two great institutions joining together to create something that didn't exist before. Am I wearing this hat still? Should I take it on? Keep it on? Okay. Leave it off. I want to hear hands raised, leave it on. That's pretty close, actually. Okay, okay, I can work with this. All right. The Simpson Project promotes literacy and literature, writers and writing across the generations. And what would our lives be like without storytelling? I don't think that's a rhetorical question, because without stories, our lives would be, quite literally, unimaginable. And that's why we have a mantra. Storytelling is the foundation of a literate society. So after me, storytelling is foundation of a literate society. I didn't feel that yet. Let's try it again. Storytelling is the foundation of a literate society. Hold that thought. We're going to come back to that. But let me highlight some of the project's principals in attendance here tonight. Beth Needle, you met. Stephen Justice, English Department Chair, is right here. Stephen, raise your hand there. You all know Vicky Shaka, who is the library manager here at this wonderful, fantastic Lafayette Library. We also have Simpson Fellow Lise Gaston, who's here over there, wonderful poet, English graduate student, as well as Noel Branch from Juvie, from the library. I know you're not in Juvie. I know you don't. And David Wood from Northgate High School. We also have past foundation president, where are you? Kristen Connolly, where are you? Where'd you go? Did she take off? Dirty, okay. Please feel free to reach out to all of us tonight, and we can all talk. Listen, many of you have generously supported the project already, and we cannot thank you enough, but we're going to keep trying. We hope to do all we can to continue to deserve your trust. Without you, we accomplish nothing, and with you, we've accomplished a little bit in our 1,209 days of existence. It's actually 1,209 days and 2 hours of our existence, and I can date it exactly. The Simpson Project has 4 drivers. 1, we educate. 2, we serve. 3, we sustain. And 4, we celebrate. Educate, serve, sustain, and celebrate. 1, we educate. By May 2019, we will have had 7 Simpson Fellows, English Department grad student professional writers, who led 7 writing workshops for about 120 underserved high school age kids at Girls Inc., at Northgate, and at juvenile detention in Martinez. Even as we continue to make inroads to create new workshops in new places. I need some water. Is that me? Did I drop something? Okay. 2, we serve. By May 2019, Joyce Carol Oates will have been, for 2 winter-spring semesters, the Simpson Project Writer-in-Residence at the Lafayette Library. And there she will be working with librarians and students and members of the broader community. She's perennially on the short list for the Nobel Prize for Literature. Maybe this is her year. That would be nice, wouldn't it? 3, we sustain. The Simpson Literary Prize of $50,000 is a major national award honoring emerged writers. I'm sorry. I thought I kicked the flu, but I didn't. It's still there. Sorry about that. We emerged authors in the middle of a burgeoning career. The 2018 Simpson Prize winner succeeded the 2017 winner, Geronimo Johnson, and he'll be in residence at Berkeley and in Lafayette, meeting with Simpson writing workshop students, Cal students, and the wider communities. Then the baton will be handed over to the 2019 winner in April. 4, we celebrate with parties, like tonight, with caviar. But we also celebrate writers and writing across the generations. Tonight, you'll receive one of these beautiful books, these anthologies of Simpson-related writings. You'll all get these as you leave. Excuse me. It's going to be tough here. Wine, maybe I need some wine. And this is a beautiful book published by Rare Bird. Julia Callahan from Rare Bird is here. Say hi to her. And what's interesting here is you'll see work by a host of Simpson-related writers, especially the students from the workshops at Northgate, at Juvie, and at Girls Inc. And they're published right alongside Joyce and Geronimo Johnson and Samantha Hunt and Ben Fountain and Laurie Osland, Martin Poussin. So that's kind of cool that they get to be in their first publication, they get to be there. It so happens that the lead story in Simpsonistas Volume 1, is by one Anthony Mara, whom you may have heard of, which leads us to the man of the hour. The marvelous Mr. Anthony Mara is the author of The Czar of Love and Techno, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and A Constellation of Vital Phenomena, longlisted for the National Book Award, and winner of the NBCC's John Leonard Prize, the Anisfield Wolf Book Award, the Barnes & Noble Discover Award, and Greece's Athens Prize for Literature. He's received the Guggenheim, a Whiting, the National Magazine Award, the Berlin Prize Fellowship, and his work has been translated into 17 languages. He has taught at Stanford University and lives in Oakland, California, which is very easy to get to the Lafayette Library from Oakland. Don't believe what you hear about Highway 24. Okay. To quote Joyce, both of Tony's highly acclaimed works of fiction astonish with their capacity for illuminating the secrets of the human heart and will endure as unique contributions to American literature of the early 21st century. Every major prize should come with a plaque, and ours comes with a backstory I should explain. As you may know, the Simpson Project is inspired by the breathtaking example of Barclay and Sharon Simpson, philanthropists and citizens without peer, human beings without peer. Also, as you know, Bark was a legendary industrialist and innovator. He founded Simpson Strong Tie, an international powerhouse business dedicated to helping people build surer, safer, connected constructions and to strengthening foundations. I have a fiduciary duty at this point to issue a metaphor advisory alert. Storytelling is the foundation of a literate society. I'm going to kill this metaphor. It's going to be like a crime scene up here when I'm done. Because when it comes to Simpson Strong Tie and the art of storytelling, there are a lot of parallels. Novels and stories are similar to houses. They metaphorically require windows, floors, ceilings, doors. That is to say, structure. They need air and light and solidity. Stories are, after all, where readers are happy to find a home. Stories link character to character. Stories connect readers to writers and to each other. Stories hold fast whole families, peoples, cultures. Stories tie everything together. They make the strongest ties. This is why you have on this plaque, Tony, a joist hanger. A beautiful joist hanger. Joist hangers ensure that your joists are reinforced. And I want to thank Simpson Strong Tie. We have Jacinta here tonight from Simpson Strong Tie, Joe Way, and Frank Emerson were very involved in this. In any case, this is a joist hanger. As you probably recognize, it's called a LUS 24. Now, not to go all Bob the Builder on you, but it's not overstating things to say that without joist hangers, you cannot have walls. You cannot have a ceiling or a floor. You cannot have a solid foundation. That's why you have your own personal joist hanger. Tony, to help make your work continue to stay strong and everlasting. And it speaks as well to the Simpson Project as a whole. We are all about solidifying foundations, making connections, reinforcing floors and walls and foundations and ceiling, so that students, librarians, writers, and readers everywhere can feel at home. On a personal note, I remember I showed Bark around my new office that I had built, and I told him, I said, Bark, this building is held down by Simpson Strong Tie rebar. And he said, Joe, this building will never fall down. That's bark. I like to think that with the support of all of us gathered here and with your foundational support, the same will be said of the Simpson Project. Tony made this prize function as a solidifier and a connector for your life as an artist. The Simpson Literary Project, the Lafayette Library and Learning Center, and the Berkeley English Department is honored to present you with the 2018 Simpson Literary Prize. Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Mara.
Thank you so much. That is so beautiful.
All right.
I feel like we should also get one.
All right, I'm going to get out of your way. I'll be going to the hospital now. I'll see you later.
Thank you so much. This is absolutely beautiful. I'm speechless. No, I am moved beyond words by this. Whoop. Am I okay? Nope. Are we all right? We're good. Okay. Thank you. I'm just gonna take this out. Maybe we'll put it. Is sure. What? Maybe we got the right one. There we go. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, for this beautiful prize, for this beautiful evening. I am absolutely overjoyed and thrilled to be here today. I'd like to thank first and foremost Joe DePrisco and the Simpson Family Foundation for this honor this evening. Beth and Sarah and the entire Lafayette Library and Learning Center, Steve and Justice and the Berkeley English Department, the Diablo Ballet, Peter and the staff at Prima for making this evening possible. You have made one writer feel overwhelmed with pride and joy. I was actually here on this stage about 5 years ago, a little more maybe. It was shortly after my first novel came out, A Constellation of Vital Phenomena, and to be back here again in such a splendid format is a real high point. I love talking at libraries, and this library in particular. Like most writers, my origin story begins at a library. Now, this was when I was in 5th grade, and the time had come for my dad to teach me about the facts of life, the birds and the bees. Now, this is a terribly awkward conversation between any father and son, but particularly in a Catholic family like mine, where every birth is virgin and every conception is immaculate. So thank goodness for libraries, right? Where befuddled and uncomfortable fathers can go to find books that will elucidate the mysteries of human anatomy. Now, I should say that libraries have defined my dad's life nearly as much as mine. He worked for the Brooklyn Public Library in high school. He went door to door tracking down overdue library books. Now, this was in the 1950s, before Brooklyn became the borough of the organic stroller. And my dad was this kind of Boy Scout bounty hunter, tracking down delinquent borrowers along the Brooklyn waterfront. Now, Had my dad come to the Lafayette Library and asked for help, no doubt the professional staff of this library would have directed him to something age-appropriate and biologically accurate. But my dad is a proud man. He mows his own lawn, he shines his own shoes, and by God, he can find sexual education reference material on his own. Thank you very much. Which is how he ended up in the romance section. On the cover of the book he selected to illuminate the mysteries of reproductive science for his impressionable 11-year-old son was Fabio. Fabio wore a kilt and a torn muslin shirt and embraced a maiden who seemed to spill from her corset like a souffle from a small pan. It was set in the medieval Scottish Highlands, and it was called The Brazen Scot Seduced Me. Now it gets much, much worse. The Brazen Scot Seduced Me was a book on tape. He played it while driving to summer camp. It was a 12-hour drive. It was a 16-hour book on tape. Now I'll step back a moment to paint a fuller picture. At the age of 11, I was a walking prayer for early onset puberty. My signature look was a cry for help. Airwalk skateboard sneakers, cargo shorts that fell to my lower shins, and shirts purchased in the husky section, which my dad called the porky department. Then there was the hair. These were the dark, dark days when Home Improvement's Jonathan Taylor Thomas reigned. I secretly admired his luscious locks on the covers of Tiger Beat and Bop that lined the CVS counters where I picked up my monthly supply of allergy medication. To mimic the Jonathan Taylor Thomas do, I divided my hair straight down the center. My dad took to calling this the butt cut. My mom called it the ass hat. Now, even my French teacher got in on the fun with derriere hair. Now, despite shellacking this thing in mousse each morning, the two cheeks soon lifted like wings, as if my hair, upon realizing the idiot to which it was attached, had decided to take flight. To keep the part, my dad suggested that I wear one of my mom's pantyhose legs pulled over my head. I put this fatherly advice into practice for months. So there we were, in the family station wagon. My dad was wearing a t-shirt and Bermuda shorts. In the passenger seat, I had a pantyhose leg cinched to my forehead like a pre-heist bank robber. Nothing to see here, officer. Just your average father and son on the road, listening to some Scottish Highlander erotica. Within about 5 minutes, before we'd even reached the highway, we realized that we had made a terrible mistake. It got very quiet. We didn't speak for a long time, for years, really. So long as neither of us acknowledged what it was we were listening to, there was a chance, however small, that we might emerge with our pride intact. We did not. About 6 hours in, we pulled over at a Cracker Barrel and ate Southwestern scrambles without making eye contact. And I must say that this was all very educational for an 11-year-old. It became the fodder for a rather colorful "What I Did Over My Summer Vacation" essay that earned me a swift referral to the guidance counselor. When we finally arrived at Camp Wachusett, both of us deeply traumatized, my dad patted me on the shoulder and spoke for the first time in 12 hours. He said, "Good talk, son. We'll pick it back up on the drive home." Now, a couple years ago, my dad apologized for not giving me a more traumatic childhood to draw artistic inspiration from, and I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. Now, good literature should make us understand who we are and where we come from, and I came to a whole new understanding of where I come from. I come from a family of lunatics. Now, several of them are in the audience tonight. And I suspect I'm going to be getting some interesting emails from my dad tomorrow. But I bring this all up not only to salute the role that public libraries have had in corrupting my innocence, but because you all are the donors and patrons and librarians and readers that have brought to life this magnificent library that has done so much for this community, so much for the East Bay, that has become this year and for years going forward, I hope, a large part of my life. And hypothetically, say someone recently came into a little bit of money and wanted to honor his father with a plaque in the Lafayette Library romance section. We could even put one of these things on it. I suspect you would know where I could begin. But in all seriousness, I'm honored beyond words to be this year's recipient of the Simpson Prize. It has already allowed me the freedom to pursue my next novel without distraction or interruption, and it offers the most precious luxury a writer can imagine, the time to sit in a quiet space and work, and hopefully at the end of this, we'll emerge with a book that is worthy of the generosity and faith you have bestowed on me. I'm going to read a brief ballet scene from The Tsar of Love and Techno, my recent novel. But before I do that, I thought I would give just a quick word on Soviet ballet in the Soviet Union, and particularly Swan Lake. It seems a little strange, perhaps, that ballet, this elegant pleasure of the 19th century Russian aristocracy, should hold such cultural prominence in the Soviet Union. There are a couple reasons for this. The first is that the USSR was stitched together from this vast polyglot geography, and ballet could be enjoyed without literacy or Russian fluency. It was an art form that didn't depend on one's ability to understand or read Russian. And in this respect, it's a little bit similar to silent films of the early 20th century here in America, that they were often, Nickelodeons were often most popular and most present in communities with a lot of recent immigrants because they could go to the theater and it was a form of entertainment that didn't depend on them speaking English. Unlike writers or composers or painters who could hide subversive works in the proverbial desk drawer, ballet is by nature a collaborative artistic medium, which limits the opportunity for dissent and offers this really tidy metaphor for the Soviet ideal of social cooperation. And no ballet occupied more space in Soviet culture than Swan Lake, Tchaikovsky's masterpiece. It was promoted enthusiastically, performed relentlessly, and it was as compulsory as a stop at the Kremlin for visiting dignitaries. One U.S. ambassador had the mixed fortune of seeing Swan Lake 132 times while stationed in Moscow. Khrushchev attended Swan Lake so often that towards the end of his time in office, he had this to say about Swan Lake. "If I think about having to see Swan Lake this evening, I get sick to my stomach. How much can one person take?" Now, in the age of television, every time a Soviet general secretary died, the TV news feed was cut, and Swan Lake was broadcast on a loop until a new successor was determined. And this could go on for days. So there could be days of nothing on TV but Swan Lake. In August 1991, a group of diehard communists tried to overthrow Gorbachev and depose him and roll back his reforms. And the first thing that they did when they were setting this coup in motion was to cut the news feeds, to black out the news, and to put Swan Lake on a loop. Now, a number of Gorbachev's allies were, this was August, they were out in the countryside, down at the Black Sea. They were out of Moscow. And this is one of the reasons why they chose this period to perform the coup. Now, in all of those places, far away from the capital, people, Gorbachev's deputies, were turning on their televisions and were seeing Swan Lake, and they knew that something terrible had gone wrong. And so they rushed back to Moscow and were able to prevent this coup from success. So in addition to being this sublime work of art, Swan Lake is something like the Soviet bat signal. So I'm just going to read a couple pages from The Tsar of Love and Techno. This is about a teenager in Arctic Siberia who falls in love with the granddaughter of a ballerina who had been famous in the 1930s for her role in Swan Lake, and this is a legacy that has weighed heavily on this young woman. On the first day of school, the principal fulminated from the podium with the fleshy necklaceness of a sea lion. If occupations were assigned by disposition, the principal would be the supreme leader of a volcanic nation island devoid of natural resources. On the stiff benches that had once furnished a gulag canteen, the assembled 14-year-olds slouched forward, aged by boredom, until they resembled in posture at least their grandparents who'd once bruised their backsides on these same seats. When the principal finished, he goose-stepped from the room to a fanfare playing only in his head. The several dozen first years had begun to stretch and mill about, but Kolya stayed seated. He didn't often feel nervous or bashful, but he was new at this school. He'd been booted from his last one, and he knew nobody in this class. The seconds ticked by, and Kolya knew he had to do something tough or clever, something that would secure his social standing, because every school must have its outcasts and weirdos, and there is no escape from that untouchable caste but death or matriculation. Time was running out. Already his classmates had clumped into bantering clusters, soon sealed by inside jokes from the trespass of outsiders. But right there, several benches away, a lanky girl sat alone. When he reached her eyes, she had already seen him. "I'm Kolya," he managed to say. "Galina," she replied. Her lips curved at the end like something wet that hadn't dried right. It was a smile. His chest unzipped from the inside. She sat next to Kolya in history class. Built during Stalin's purges, the school had originally been a prison, and the bars gritting, the history classroom windows cast toothy shadows across the floorboards. Galina couldn't sit still. An invisible flame burned beneath her desk, too weak to set the wood alight, but strong enough to singe her skin if she sat too long in the same position. Every day she twirled her pencil between her fingers, and inevitably it tumbled to the side of the desk where she couldn't reach it. Kolya retrieved it. "Thanks," she whispered. "It's nothing," he said. As the pencil shortened with each sharpening, Kolya's fingertips came closer and closer and closer until one splendid day they touched hers. And on that day, Kolya asked Galina if she wanted to go for a walk. A parachute of yellow smoke, tethered by thick billows to the smokestack, hung permanently over a city that had begun its life as an atoll in the Gulag archipelago. 12 smokestacks, the tallest structures for 500 kilometers, encircled Lake Mercury, a man-made lake of industrial runoff whose silvered waters were so veined with exotic chemicals, they lapped against the gravel-pocked banks year-round, unfrozen even in the Arctic winter. The smelters produced sulfuric soot so dense it stained the ground, accumulating in such vast concentrations that even the snowdrifts became mineable. Stars hadn't been visible in the night sky for several generations. By any objective measure, the environment was unfavorable to human flourishing, which made it the more remarkable that Kolya and Galina would find each other, like a couple widowed socks paired at the end of a wash. They sauntered along the gravel road that lassoed Lake Mercury. Kolya fixed his eyes on the frozen ground to avoid the face of the young woman so near he felt her heat signature like a phantom of spring sun. She told him how much she hated ballet, how terrible a dancer she was, and Kolya took her mittened hand in his own. He placed his right hand on the small of her back, pressing through the layers until she tipped toward him. His fingers found the valleys of her vertebrae. Then he started humming. It took her a moment to find in his atonal exhilaration the melody of the pas de deux of Swan Lake. By the time she did, she was already cantering, cratering the frost. "What are you doing?" she asked. Dance was supposed to be choreographed, rehearsed, and sterilized until its most trivial imperfections had been obliterated and performed to a silent and judgmental audience. It wasn't supposed to be spontaneous. It was never fun. "This is ballet," she stammered. "You don't waltz in a ballet." "I don't even know what a waltz is," Kolya said, breaking his a cappella rendition long enough to spin Galina in small circles, dipping her until her hair swished against the ground. She joined in when he reprised the theme, this feeling of rightness, of belonging to-ness. It wasn't an idea or a word, but an absence of ideas and words, an airiness, where blood and bone had been, right to the tips of her weightless fingers fastened within his in case she floated away. Smokestacks spouted golden pillars of pollution. Shadows widened beyond wedges of electric light. Kolya entered the theme with an orchestra of punch-drunk madmen alive in him, belting the tune to the yellow smoke, to the misting lake, to the carcinogens no song could dislodge from his capillaries, and in this amphitheater of decimated industry, on a stage of ice and steel, he taught the granddaughter of a prima ballerina to dance. Thank you.
I feel like I'm dishonoring the stage after that. That was,
Me too.
that was so fantastic. So we're here to, one of us is going to be able to talk for a few minutes. I don't know what hit, I don't know what hit me. Well, that's very nice of you.
Thank you so much.
So Tony, that was a hilarious piece about the library. Was it true?
It was, I'd say half true, half embellishment.
Such a writer.
Yeah. There was the Scottish erotica, the drive to Camp Wachusett, and the business with the birds and the bees. That was all true. I just kind of stretched it a little bit. But it's one of those things where, I would never publish that in anything because I would never hear the end of it, for one. But also because, if you publish something in a magazine or, a newspaper, there's a certain degree of accuracy your reader demands. But that story, to me, feels more true to my relationship with my dad than most 100% true stories. And I think it's one of those interesting things where, in our own lives, we are constantly fictionalizing and changing the parameters of our memories in order to create these reflections, perhaps not of historical reality, but of a kind of emotional reality. And the idea of being stuck in a car for, 12 hours listening to this weird softcore Scotland stuff, that feels really true to like a sort of old-fashioned father-son relationship. I don't know, how did...
Yeah, I mean, my childhood experiences at the libraries were totally erotic. Wait, did that come out loud? I didn't know to say that. Oh. That's where you find out everything. All the forbidden knowledge you seek for, it's in the library. So I spent a lot of time in the Berkeley Public Library, wandering around the stacks, which is pretty adventurous in and of itself, wandering around the stacks in the Berkeley Public Library. So, I love libraries. And I made the mistake. I remember finding I remember falling in love with the poems of Stephen Crane and the stories of William Carlos Williams. So I got it exactly wrong. I should have been interested more in the stories of Stephen Crane and the poems of William Carlos Williams. But that's the great thing about library. It's you're searching. You're looking for things you don't even know you're looking for. But anyway, so the libraries are wonderful, and this is such a wonderful library. Those of you who have, I see most of, but there's some of you here who haven't been very often to the Lafayette Public Library. This is such a treat here. And the people who operate this library are so wonderful, and I really urge you to spend time here. But anyway, let's talk about your work. What are you working on now? And writers don't usually like that. Sometimes like that question. Sometimes don't like that question. Where are you?
Well, we're among friends tonight.
Okay.
So, no, it's interesting, like how the framing of the question, that because I know that a lot of writers are very uncomfortable of talking about their works in progress, and I've never been really one of those, but I think there is kind of this like superstition that if you say something, then you actually have to do it, and that's always the great fear that that you're going to bite off more than you can chew. I'm currently working on a novel set in Italy and in Los Angeles in the 1930s and 1940s. And I know right when Russia becomes, the talk of the town, I'm veering away from it. But yeah, the novel is set mainly in Los Angeles, and it involves an Italian who basically escapes the fascist regime and moves to LA. And sort of settles in within this exiled community in Los Angeles. There was a huge, European refugee exiled population in LA at that time period. It was nicknamed Sunny Siberia by these exiles and refugees. And I love the idea of novels being ways, novels set either in distant places or in far-off historical time periods as being ways of giving us a little bit of a different angle on the present. This was something the other day that I said, but there's this recent novel, a book called Asymmetry, and there's this one quote in it where this character is trying to think about how you write about other people and other time periods, and sort of the limitations of the author being, sort of trapped in one body, one mind. And she says that, she uses this metaphor that you as a writer can hold a mirror out, and you can tilt the mirror so that it points away from you, and you can turn it so far that not even you can recognize yourself within the mirror. But that doesn't mean that you're not the person holding the mirror, and just because you can't see yourself in the mirror doesn't mean that no one can see you in it. It's a brilliant book, a writer named Lisa Halliday. But I love that idea of novels being these mirrors that we can tilt away from ourselves to other periods that inadvertently sort of reflect back on us. And my first book, A Constellation of Vital Phenomena, is set in the war in Chechnya in the 90s and early 2000s. But in many ways, it was written and conceived of and was sort of grappling with a lot of issues that the war on terror and the war in Iraq were posing here in America. The Tsar of Love and Techno is a book that's about a lot of things, but one of the primary things is sort of propaganda and the manipulation of images of alternative facts, and the idea that a government can sort of create a counterfactual history and a sort of a counterfactual reality that its citizens must subscribe to. And obviously, that's something that in today's day and age seems pretty important to dwell upon. And so the 30s and 40s feel to me like a particularly interesting period in trying to grapple with a lot of the political and cultural and social questions we're thinking about today in terms of refugees, the rise of far right-wing groups, et cetera, et cetera.
So writers are given lots of advice. In fact, there's a whole industry about writers giving advice to writers. And the line, write what you know. And there's a counter school to that is write what you don't know. Now, following up on what you just said about asymmetry, you actually do both. You write what you know and write what you don't know. So it becomes a search for the answers that you're afraid you're going to find. So I haven't read the new stuff you're working on. So I assume that's why you're learning Italian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've been taking Italian classes the last couple of I guess, the last year and a half.
Come va?
I'm terrible.
Rita, where are you, Rita? We got to help you. Rita.
But
There are good curses, and there are good.
I know I've gotten most of the good ones from you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've been taking them up at Italingua, and it's sort of, the first couple books that I was working on, I had no interest in my own family history or country or anything. Nothing could seem more more boring than that. That the whole point of writing and reading for me was always to kind of escape and to go somewhere else, to be someone else. And it was only over the last couple of years that my dad's side of the family is Italian, and just hearing some of those stories really made me think, it's time to point that mirror inward a little bit.
We can take a few questions here. Comments? Anybody have to say? Yes, Marianne.
Did you write as a little boy?
Did I write as a little boy?
He's still a little boy. Amazingly.
No, I didn't. I wasn't. I had no interest in being a writer. I think when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a scientist. But you have to pass, freshman year biology in order to move on. And I was never a really good student, and I ended up not going to college right away. I was living at home with my folks, and I was working at a UPS store, and sort of on my way to being a full-time bum. I think I was giving my mom at least ample opportunity to regret the sacrifices she had made on my behalf by taking a year to loaf around and smoke weed. But my mom was basically like, if you're going to live in our house and not be in school, you're going to have to do something to exercise your swiftly atrophying gray matter. And she said there was at this community center near our house, there was this creative writing workshop for retirees. And so I signed up, and I was 19 years old. I was the youngest person by 50 years. It ended up being just this terrific experience, being with people who didn't live with their parents. Some of them were living with their children. And just, meeting these people who had lived these really fascinating, colorful, interesting lives and had these, this vast bank of experiences and memories to draw upon. And I just had a wonderful time with them. And it was the first quasi-academic subject that I had come upon that I had somewhat of a knack for. And
Is that where you learned to love language the way you do?
I'm not sure. I would possibly. I feel like that was sort of when I first got that feeling that I think a lot of writers get, where you're making something up and you're putting it on a piece of page and it's still there the next day, and just that feeling of, oh my goodness, like, wowee, look at that, which is really this kind of exuberant experience, I think, when you first start doing it. But it was this real moment, sort of being sort of like not only finding something that I loved, but also being around people who in all these different ways were absolutely different from me, but that I kind of wanted to grow up to become. I wanted to be someone who would be in one of those classes in 50 years and have all of this interesting stuff to say. Yeah.
Mike.
Would you talk more about what you like to read?
Yeah, what I like to read. I usually read a lot of stuff for research. So right now I'm reading just a ton of stuff on 1940s Los Angeles, Hollywood, World War II, that sort of stuff. In terms of fiction, I usually probably tend to read more contemporary novels. What am I reading now? I just started last night a Mario Vargas Llosa book Aunt Julia and Aunt Julia, the scriptwriter. Yeah. I'm only like 10 pages into it, but already in that. So as an example of seeing one's own culture in a book, in, I don't know, 10 or 12 pages in, this character, it works at a radio station, and he basically plagiarizes the news from various sources, and he changes a couple adjectives here and there and sends it out to be read on the hour. And he's working with this other guy who, rather than what we would consider news, he instead just wants to write about these sort of scandals and these disasters, and so he makes up earthquakes that are happening and these sort of catastrophe and sort of disaster stuff as kind of entertainment. And the narrator looks at him and says, when we say news, we mean two different things. And it was one of those moments where you could read that and think of 2018 America and feel the exact same thing. But I usually Mario Vargas Llosa has been a big influence of mine. Zadie Smith is probably is certainly one of my favorite writers. Edward P. Jones is another guy that I really love. David Mitchell, Marilyn Robinson. I like to read while I write. So I have this kind of like weird schedule where I have a little timer on my computer, and it goes off every 20 minutes. And every 20 minutes, I get a 5-minute break. And I usually spend those 5 minutes reading something. And I kind of love the idea of other people's sentences, sort of filling up my tank a little bit in those little breaks. Yeah, yeah.
Listen.
First, I'd like to say I loved your book, Bizarre Love and Techno. It was really, I even texted Joe and said I was done with it. I love this book. But why Chechnya? Now, what possessed you to write a book about such a desolate place? And how did you imbue that with, it was a love story, really, in nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Nice question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
How do you do that?
So it originally, I ended up, I eventually went to college, and I ended up doing like a study abroad thing in St. Petersburg. I was studying Russian literature and had taken various Russian classes and spent 5 months in St. Petersburg at St. Petersburg State University. And I arrived, I think it must have been like 6 or 7 weeks after Anna Politkovskaya, a famous Russian journalist who was reporting in Chechnya, was assassinated. And this was sort of at the tail end of the conflict, but it was still really defined Russian life in a way, again, that made me thinking about living in Washington, D.C. or New York City in 2002, something like that, in terms of the way that you felt the ramifications sort of echoing. And I lived down the street from a military cadet academy, and I would see these military cadets marching up and down the neighborhood in formation, and they would often march past this metro station where you would see veterans, often debilitated or missing their legs. They'd be out panhandling, and just this image that I would see almost every day of these 16, 17-year-old cadets marching past these homeless veterans just really kind of stuck with me, and I wanted to see what it was that separated these two groups of young people, and it was, of course, it was Chechnya. And so for a number of years, I was just trying to, I had no interest in writing about it, I was just trying to read as much as I could. And then at some point, I felt like I kind of exhausted the literature a little bit. And in all of that time, I wasn't able to find a novel that was available in English that was set there. Since then, there's been a couple that have been translated from Russian from the perspective of Russian soldiers, but still, none really from the perspective of ordinary civilians there. And the idea of writing the book you wanted to read really sort of struck me. And it seemed like this was something that, even though I was very much an outsider, it was something that I had perhaps a little bit more information than the average than the average American, and might fill this what seemed to me like a pretty big gap. And that ended up becoming my first novel, Constellation of Vital Phenomena, and then that sort of ended up sort of spiraling into The Tsar of Love and Techno and the short story collection.
Regan, I'm sorry, did you say something, Les?
No, thank you.
Regan?
Did you, in the process of becoming a writer, did you have anyone who was a particular mentor to you, whether it was a professor or an editor you worked with?
Can you all hear that question? No, the question was, who was your mentor as you left the UPS job? And
Yeah, it's I think I've never had like one person who I was sort of like the apprentice under and was really the a continual mentor figure. But I certainly when I went to school, the writer T.C. Boyle was one of my professors, and he was very kind to me and sort of urged me to apply to MFA programs. I went to graduate school at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and a writer there, Ethan Kanan, was very supportive and encouraging. The writer Adam Johnson down at Stanford was someone who was really really kind to me. I would say probably the person that maybe I would credit the most with was a poet. Her name is Cecilia Wallach, and I don't think she's particularly particularly famous. She was an adjunct at USC when I went there, and I didn't realize this at the time, but she donated so much of her time and energy to me. I had this terrible college novel that will remain in the desk drawer forever, and totally, she wasn't getting paid for this. This was totally her own kindness. She went through it with me week by week. Each week she would read 20 pages, and we would get together and talk about it. And now, having seen just the amount of work adjunct lecturers have to do, it's really just overwhelmed me, the kindness of that action.
Yes, sir.
Kind of a question towards your character development. Without giving spoilers away, some of your favorite characters, my favorite characters in your books, you read about Kolya, and in the first book, Ramzan. I hate to call them villains, but let's call them bringers of misfortune or bad luck or mischief even. They start off as characters that you really hate them. They're terrible people. They do these terrible things, but at the end of the book, they're maybe the most relatable, and you turn it into this thing where their decisions, you think about it, and you wouldn't do anything different, and you'd be in the same position as them. So I'm just curious why you turn your why, besides being a good writer, and that's the answer, but you take your villains and you turn them into some of the most compassionate, I feel sorry for you situations.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I love the feeling of reading a novel and kind of feeling like it's an empathy experiment. That it's forcing you as a reader to reevaluate your allegiances as you go, so that it not only becomes a different book as you progress, but you kind of become a different reader. And the idea of making a villain feel sympathetic and feel human and feel understandable, to be able to understand something that you profoundly disagree with, to sort of understand the motives behind them. I think it's a very tricky, it puts the reader in a very tricky position, because we're so used to, obviously condemning people for doing bad things, and the ability to kind of short circuit that feeling of approbation is one that I really enjoy. For both of those books, I think that transformation works a little bit because they're both characters who are, in the end, victims of their circumstances in a lot of ways. And so while their moral choices we may find fault with, it's really the system that has allowed those, those choices to become incentivized. And so I think by following a character through that, following in the case of Constellation, Ramzan, this informer, or in Tsar, Kolya, who is first comes back from war and basically can only get a job working as a heavy for a drug dealer. Both of those characters kind of exist in a way to illustrate the conditions that that kind of allow that kind of violence and crime and what have you to exist. But my favorite characters in both of the books are also those two, for the precise reason that you said that. Yeah, that to feel. I mean, I guess it's interesting. We always you always hear in school and writers are always talking about characters transforming over the course of a book, and it's almost always presented as this character growth, that you grow from from innocence to maturity. You grow from sort of towards heroism. That the Hollywood arc is always moving us towards this kind of kinder and more compassionate understanding. But I think that I really like the idea of basically you're starting with bad people and you end with bad people, and along the way you simply understand what made them bad. And I think that simply that creates, not in the characters, but within the readers themselves, this sense of change or transformation.
So the other night, you read at Cal, in the Fife Room's wonderful conversation you had with Shannon Pafal. And you said at one point that the characters who interested you the most were characters who made deals with the devil. And do you see that around you a lot, where characters are making? Do writers make deals with the devil?
I mean, I live the most boring life imaginable. I don't think I make many deals. Not too many people I know, I would say. I mean, I'm not sure. I think present company excluded.
Thank you.
I think that we probably all do make deals, Faustian bargains along the way. Some are larger and some are smaller. I guess the books I read I don't really see as being a reflection of my life. I live a pretty charmed life in Berkeley, not in Soviet Siberia. But I think the kind of ethical questions that I find interesting, and that maybe that I grapple with at a much smaller and reduced scale, are similar. So yeah, this question of what we're willing to bargain, temporary gains for long-term losses. I'm going to get on an airplane on Monday. I know that that air travel is perhaps the largest individual sort of person, individual level contribution to global warming that we do. And I take dozens of plane flights a year. I fly all over the place. And that's a short-term game that I'm willing to trade off for a much larger long-term loss. We all presumably got here in cars. None of us are willing to really make many sacrifices for the sake of our grandchildren in terms of the future of the planet. I think whether we're conscious of it or not, we make these kinds of devil's bargains every day, whether it's in our politics or in our environmental decisions. And to be able to dramatize those kinds of questions in a short story or a novel, and make them meet the stakes and the consequences feel alive and visceral, and force readers, to force myself to confront these things that in my own daily life I can quite easily ignore, and that probably most of us can quite easily ignore, is one of the real profound aspects that that literature sort of allows us to engage with.
I guess it's too late to point out that you didn't read the fine print for the Simpson Prize.
Oh no.
Talking about the deal with the devil. No. One or two more questions, and then anybody have anything you want to say? Is that you, Peter? Jeannie. Jeannie.
I just want to say that I think that in reading your books that there's a lot of things to say, but one thing that strikes me is that you have humor in your books, sometimes juxtaposed to very terrible things, and your characters that are posed in a situation where they're having to make terrible choices are often under tremendous duress, not under the type of duress we're under every day. So it's easy to be very morally on a high horse when you're not under torture. But I wonder where the humor comes from, kind of a whimsy, in a way.
Yeah.
So Jeannie's asking, in case you didn't hear us, what's so funny? This is a tragic life.
I think it's very interesting how you juxtapose that, and it's kind of a stop when you're reading, but really kind of intriguing. And I just, as a technique or
Yeah.
a practice, like, did that always come naturally to you, or were you kind of the funny guy in your family, or?
No, I actually I found humor to be very difficult to write for a long time. And I think it's because often when you're beginning to write, and sadly for many people, as they continue to write, sort of go into this mode of I need to be serious. And I've got a friend whose novels are very serious and dour, and he's a brilliant writer. But when we correspond in emails, it's this entirely different voice, and one that I personally find much more human and much more charming, and that I engage with much more than I do, the more novelistic one. I think that humor is sort of is a writer's kind of best friend. That there's nothing like a joke, nothing like making a reader laugh to connect the reader to a character. That it just glues you to a character once you're laughing with that character. I think that particularly when writing dark stuff, you need to have a lot of humor to juxtapose it. You need to be playing both ends of the keyboard. And I think that's part just to give your reader a little bit of a break here and there, but I also think it's accurate to those situations. When I was traveling through Chechnya to research these works, people were constantly making jokes about very serious stuff, and it would always be the thing that you were most afraid of. So I was afraid of getting kidnapped, and so people were always joking about stuffing me into the trunks of cars. And by the end, I found it quite funny. I was like, yeah, I'm waiting to hop in the back. So I think that in these situations where violence is capricious, where you never know when a falling piano is going to come out of the sky, and that's curtains for you. I think that this sort of like absurdist humor is very natural in those environments. And maybe lastly, I would say that I think that for any situation and any character, but particularly these dark ones, humor is kind of a form of dignity you give your characters. That to say that because this is about a dark or serious subject, we're going to limit the scale of your emotional life to just these somber tones feels like a kind of cruelty. That a fart joke can be a true kindness you give your characters. And you see that in a lot of the literature of Chechnya. Anna Politkovskaya, for instance, writes these incredibly funny sequences where essentially people are getting shot at. But the way that she presents it, the way that they understand their own sort of dislocation from any kind of reasonable or rational universe ends up being very bleak and very dark, but also funny in this weird way.
So that's wonderful. I want to remind everybody that on Wednesday at 1 o'clock here in the Community Hall, Ben Fountain, who was a finalist for the 2018 Simpson Prize, is a wonderful novelist. Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, fantastic novel. He has a study, a nonfiction work about the political campaign the national political campaign we just went through. Beautiful Country, Burn Again, which is a Robinson Jeffers line. Anyway, He's a terrific writer. He's a terrific speaker. He's very funny. He's very dark. And he'll be here at 1 o'clock. He's on the tour with his... I just said this. Oh, yeah, there it is.
Great cover.
Yeah, it's a great cover.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Tony. You were fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Drive safe.